good evening and welcome. We're going to call the special meeting for the Akron Public Schools Board of Education for Wednesday, May 27th to order. Roll call, please.
Dr. Akbar.
Here.
Mr. Alexander.
Present.
Ms. Autry.
Present.
Mr. Bravo.
Here.
Dr. Hall.
Aye.
Mrs. Mansfield.
Here.
Mrs. McKittrick.
Here.
Thank you.
And if you could all mute, then we will do the Pledge of Allegiance, and I will lead us in that this evening. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, under God, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you so much. With that, we are going to go ahead and jump, I think, right into the meeting. And before we do that, I just want to kind of lay some groundwork for tonight's meeting. Obviously, this is a public meeting and we're streaming live. You can find the link on our website, or you can find it in the board docs if you would like to view it later. We're going to try and follow a very strict agenda tonight. The meeting is dedicated mainly to the basics, levy basics, and it's meant to lay a foundation for future levy discussions. And the three main focus areas that we're going to cover tonight include Levy 101, levy history, and those are sort of together, a review of the timeline and approvals that are needed in order for this board to put a levy before the voters if it wishes to do so. And we're going to review or receive some updates on our current budget, some information if there's any available on what our 2020-2021 budget is looking like, and our 5-year forecast and assumptions. We're going to ask this board to limit its questions and comments to what we're discussing tonight. And we're going to leave some time at the end of the discussion for each of you to ask questions or to raise topics that you would like to see addressed at our future meetings. When we do open it up for questions, because we're on a tight time frame tonight, I know some folks have other commitments. We'd like everyone to have an opportunity to be heard. So we're going to ask that you limit yourself to one question or comment until everyone has had a chance to ask a question or make a comment, and then we'll come back around to you again. Future meetings, which you'll see a little bit later, if we choose to have them in the structure that we've kind of drafted out for you, would include topics like levy campaigns and levy campaign finance, the role of our various stakeholders in a levy campaign, and of course, millage and forecast modeling, which would likely cover at least 2 meetings. So obviously we would have liked to begin our levy discussions a little earlier in the year, but circumstances surrounding COVID-19 and our need to put our focus where it needed to be these last several weeks have prevented us from doing so. So here we are staring down June 1st and needing to begin discussions to determine whether or not to place a levy before the voters, and if so, for what millage, and whether or not to run a full levy campaign. Which brings us to one of the handouts that Ryan had sent out previously, but he also sent it out this week in preparation for our meeting, and that is the levy timeline handout, if you have that available. And what that timeline essentially says is that 90 days before the general election on November 3rd, which would be August 5th, we need to have passed at least 2 levies, one declaring it necessary to put a levy on the ballot, and one certification or a second levy or second resolution. And I'm having trouble pulling those up, so you have the handout in front of you. But those 2 resolutions would need to be passed at our July 7th regular board meeting, unless, of course, we held a special meeting between July 27th and August 5th. But either way, that's a pretty tight timeline. And as you can see, our discussions need to take place between now and July 27th at that regular board meeting where we would need to approve those resolutions. So based on our earlier conversations as a board and at Finance Committee, NJ and I met twice within the last week to discuss an ideal strategy or an ideal scenario for how to structure these conversations in a way that really gives the board enough time to have the discussions. It gives staff enough time to put information together and to answer questions and to bring information back to the board. So we tried to design something that would be as productive as possible, that would allow some time in between those meetings to also inform and engage the community and receive free feedback, and a timeline that still brought us to making that decision by July 27th. So what I'm going to share with you is really just an ideal scenario. It is not set in stone. It's just an example of how we could structure our conversations as I just suggested. And we're going to adjust it based on your feedback tonight. So we're going to, in a moment, I'm going to show you this, and then in a moment, I'm going to cede the floor to Ryan, and he's going to walk us through some of the basic information behind a levy. What is a levy? What is millage? What's inside millage versus outside millage? What's our history with levies in the past? How much millage do we have? What's our effective tax rate? That kind of information. And then we're going to circle back to what I'm about to show you, which is the calendar. And we're going to talk about how we would like to structure these conversations. Again, this is just a model that we came up with, but it's really going to be up to the board how we structure those next discussions. So if you give me just a moment, I'm going to share my screen. So that you can see what I'm talking about. Technology would be great if I had more than one screen. All right, here we go. I will try and see if I can make this a little bit smaller. Ooh, not that small. All right. So what we've basically done, if you start with week 1, as you can see, there are, and I will scroll slowly because I know there's a slight bit of a delay. There are 10 weeks between now and our regular board meeting where we would need to pass resolutions authorizing that a levy be placed on the ballot before the voters. In order to have enough discussions, we figured that that gave us enough time for as many as 5 discussions every other week beginning this week. So we put those on the calendar. They're laying on top of Wednesday just out of convenience because it's the middle of the calendar, it's the middle of the week, and it gave me enough space to type everything. Those are not obviously set in stone. They just allow for special meetings every other week. And as you can see, there would be 5 meetings between now and our regular board meeting on July 27th. In between, if we wanted to, we could do as many as 3 virtual town halls. And I'm also going to let NJ jump in here in a moment to talk about, to add to the discussion and what we talked about. But we could do as many as 3 virtual town halls of some sort to try and relay to the community or connect with the community in some meaningful way about the discussions that we're having here. So with that, NJ, I'd like to open it up to you to add to the discussion, anything that you would like to add.
Yes, so the only 2 minor points with the virtual town halls, we looked at it being important that we collaborate with individuals and groups that already have people that are concerned with our schools and with the future of our schools in our community. And so each meeting we put together some suggestions of groups that we could approach. Again, these are just some suggestions. We haven't gone out and asked anybody to do anything yet, but the thought is that each one of the town halls we would partner with different groups, and hopefully they could get the membership to attend, as well as help us advertise the virtual town halls. And the purpose of the virtual town halls prior to actually making a decision is for us to do the best we can to get some feedback. We're not going to get an exhaustive amount of feedback from everyone. And of course, they all will be open to the public. So anyone could come, not just members of those groups. But we wanted to make that available so that everyone can have the maximum amount of information that they need to make a decision, yes or no, when the vote comes on the 27th, if we follow this timeline. And then the last thing is we will definitely have many other town halls after the vote. So if we vote in the affirmative, there will be many other town halls. So hopefully you don't see that there's 3 town halls and think that's all we'll ever do, but that's just to gather some initial information so that we can make a decision and get sentiments of people who are stakeholders of our school district.
Good, thank you. And as I said before, we're gonna have our basic discussion tonight. And again, if we could keep the conversation focused on the basics. A couple of us, I think Bruce and Lisa have been through a little, at least one more levy cycle than I have. But even we have only been through a couple levy cycles, and we recognize that a couple of you have only been on the other side of a levy cycle. So we're going to take tonight just to talk about the foundation and the basics, take it very sort of elementary from the ground up. What is a levy, and why do we need one, and what does it look like in Akron? So we're going to start there, and I'm going to hand it to Ryan. I've asked Ryan to kind of chunk it out into those categories or those sort of areas. He's going to pause after each area and ask if there are any questions, and then I will help moderate the questions. If we could just remember that we're going to limit it to one question or comment, and then give someone else an opportunity to ask a question or make a comment, and then we'll come back around if you have additional. So Ryan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mr. President. And thanks for providing an opportunity to the board and to the community to talk through the basics of levy. So hopefully I'll start at a really high level and get as much into the weeds on millage and millage amounts and effective mills and all those kind of things that can be overwhelming a bit. But 3 questions maybe you can think about as we talk through this. Why levies? Why levies in Ohio? How do they work, and why do they work the way they do? And then why now? There's some really good materials from the Ohio School Boards Association. I sent those out, and I'll be following along the OSBA Understanding, the 101 document, and the levy activities. And believe it or not, you have to start with a history lesson. The history lesson goes back to Ohio's Constitution. In very early days, Ohio made the constitutional choice that education in Ohio would be a shared responsibility between the local community and the state. And that's where the origination of state versus local funding started. It was very much a partnership in the beginning. And we're going to talk through the different iterations of this and ultimately what's led us to today. And when people hear the word levy, they think of a lot of different things in terms of how schools are funded. And so hopefully we dispel some of the myths and or rumors regarding what a levy truly is, the constitutionality of it, and then how school districts really are good and if not great stewards of taxpayer dollars. And as we know, under this circumstance, plays a vital, if not essential service role. So as I mentioned, school districts are financed with a combination of state, local, and federal funds. And a property tax levy, and what we're talking about now, is an operating levy. There are a couple different types we can talk about throughout. is an assessment or a millage assessment on the total property. And as you know, there's different types of property, but generally speaking, that levy is vetted by a Board of Education, placed on a ballot initiative, and passed by the public. It's about as transparent a process as ever comes before our voters, because there are certain statutory requirements prior to placing a levy on a ballot. Now, we talk about mill and millage. The common belief is a mill equals a million. It's actually 1/10 of 1%. And it is a ratio in which Ohio has dedicated to assess taxes. And every district has different types of millage in terms of effective or inside or outside or voted mills. And that's where some of the anxiety related to the word levy has come from. Because as you know, in Ohio, Ohio's school funding system has been declared unconstitutional 4 times. As many people believe that because it's been declared unconstitutional, the method of how we supply revenue for schools is unconstitutional. It's actually not the case. Some people have said that the over-reliance on property taxes is the unconstitutional. That's actually not the case. It's components of the formula that provide inequitable distribution of revenue across the state. It's not thorough and vetted enough to provide as equitable distribution in Ohio. That's the true nature of the constitutionality. Not that it's unconstitutional to tax local property tax, both residential and commercial industrial. Quite the opposite, actually, for what our forefathers said, is that this is going to be a shared responsibility between the local and state. So I won't go through in detail what an inside mill is, what an outside mill is. I think the important part to know there is the government placed some restrictions on our millage rates. And they said, think of inside millage as, well, what's the minimum that every district or public taxing authority needs to operate? And then it's each community's choice to tax above that. Outside mills would be those levies approved by voters. There is something you should know very much that has a deep-rooted negative sentiment in Ohio as it relates to levies. We often overlook it because it's been since 1976 since this legislation was passed. It's in the Constitution. It's called House Bill 920. And if you remember from early January prior to COVID, when we had an opportunity in person to welcome our new board members and to kind of go as a review of school finance, House Bill 920 is the #1 reason that school districts come back to their voting public. And just at a high level, House Bill 920 is an anti-inflationary measure. So in the 1970s, we had rampant inflation, and a large portion of our homeowners, residential, were experiencing double-digit tax growth per year on their tax bill. So Ohio said, we got to put this in the Constitution. We have to stop that. So they applied for, unfortunately, about a decade worth of inflation. They applied generational change in what rolled back the inflationary measures. So you hear a reduction factor got put into levies. I'll show you an example of that, just so everybody knows that in the full transparency of why and how House Bill 920 happened, it is a real thing. And then finally, why now? The House Bill 920 lead into the why now is, as you know, as we've studied, as we've listened and followed other districts around Ohio, whether it be the Big Eight or our suburban counterparts, we see those headlines of all of us taking our turn, whether it be for operating, whether it be for permanent improvement, or whether it be a bond initiative for new facilities. We've been blessed in Akron with one of the larger bond facility and state partnerships over the last 17 to 20 years. That's going to come in around $700 million of shared resources between the local and state to build new facilities in the district. We've been blessed by that. I think you've heard from finance committees about, on average, back 30 years or so, our fiscal cycle says that we need to seek new operating funds every 6 years on average. It's now been 8. And the reason it's been 8 is because of the good fiscal stewardship of the board and superintendent and those who are our predecessors in managing the footprint. There was a time in the district where we had 50,000 plus students and we had an infrastructure to support that. And those difficult decisions have been made over the last 15 or so years with the new facilities program to right size our footprint. Those are great examples and good stewards of taxpayer dollars. So we've been able to extend that a little bit to 8 years. But we're now approaching the time where we're starting to deficit spend, as the most recent forecast says, and we need to start that conversation. It is too late of a conversation if we're showing a cash balance in the red and we're trying to pass new operating. It is the right time to talk about operating levy when you begin to deficit spend, dipping into your savings, which puts educational programs at risk. If you look back in Ohio levies, especially leading up to 2008, I think a lot of districts went through a lot of change during the Great Economic Recession. There was this vicious cycle, and I'm sure you saw some of it leading up to 2012, where about every 6 years the district had a cash surplus and had rebuilt programs back from a previous levy attempt. And then unfortunately, you had to reduce some of those education or athletic or co-curricular programs to pass and create the sense of urgency to pass new operating funds. I'm very thankful that this board, and I think the education community at large, knows that we just don't come and communicate in times of need. That's why we've started prior to a deficit spend. That's why we're addressing it sooner, because what I hear from you and the superintendent and the leadership and stakeholders in the community are the educational programs are what make us special. And that's what we need to protect. A couple more points, and then as the board president mentioned, I will pause. I do want to show you what the reduction factor looks like. As I bring this up, in the history of all public schools in the state of Ohio, no school district has ever defaulted on debt. That should largely be construed as school districts are very highly rated on Wall Street. They look at the balance between the state and local and the security of how we're funded, the transparency of state audits. We are extremely transparent, well-funded, well-managed, well-audited, and that always doesn't resonate when you're asking for new money. So I want to share a screen now. Can everybody see this detail?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll zoom in just a little bit so everybody can get a sense. Again, this isn't meant to show you the validity or take you through this document. As you can see in the top left-hand corner, this is the Summit County Budget Commission certification of tax levy. This is to show you the true impact of House Bill 920, how we collect funds based on the top right of about $2.5 billion in value. In the way that you get how much revenue you need, which I know is going to be a future meeting. How much millage do you need? How much does it collect? How does it affect the forecast and programs? Is you take millage times value equals your revenue. And if you zoom in, if everybody can see where my cursor is, I've highlighted some numbers there in the middle of the page. So everybody see this column that says maximum rate to be authorized, the reduction factor, and the effective rate. Does everybody see that? On each levy that we've passed since 1976 and prior, what was on inside millage, with the exception of inside millage, that reduction factor has been applied each and every year as there's incremental growth. What you'll see is on full voted millage that happened prior to 1976, if no reduction factor had been applied, we'd be at a full 26 mils of collected value. And if you see what has happened over time since that constitutional amendment, is it's saying we are effectively charging on this levy 11 mils of those 26 on residential and 15.5 on commercial industrial. I know this is a really high, and this is where I want to stop the detail part of this, because this is where we can really lose folks. Maybe offer the suggestion that we discuss that component in Finance Committee, but just to show everyone the true nature of how that reduction factor has really put school districts at a disadvantaged position in coming back to their voting public on their cycle. Our cycle happens to be every 6 to 8 years. With that, Mr. President, I'll pause, hopefully answering why levy, how does it work, and why now?
Great. And before we move on to the next topic, then we'll pause there and we'll open it up for questions. I also want to make a comment too, just about, we have some really great resources in this meeting tonight, and David and his leadership over the last several years, Ellen and her leadership and her experience running these levy campaigns and what that means. And we'll talk about that in future meetings. And obviously Ryan and his experience with the book. So please take advantage of that. If you have questions, we'll pause, open it up for questions. Remember, we'll keep it to one question, comment, and then move on to someone else if they have one, and then we can come back. So I'm keeping an eye on the chat and on your hands if they're raised. So please let me know if you'd like to jump in with a question. Going once.
Yeah, hey, Mr. President, this is Dr. Hall. I actually have a comment.
Yes, go ahead.
For Ryan, I do think that that the Finance Committee is the most appropriate place to sort of unpack the reduction factor that you talked about, because yeah, we could get down a rabbit hole super quick. So I just want to say that I agree with you. That's the place to kind of unpack it.
Great.
Good. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Anyone else with a question or comment before we move on to the next topic? Going twice? Going 3 times? All right, Ryan, I think you're good.
All right, the next on our topic, if you want me to cover these, the review of timeline as approvals needed. I think, Mr. President, you touched on those. Just briefly, we have 2 resolutions that need to be considered prior to any levy attempt, and that's the resolution of necessity and the resolution to proceed. We have some documentation that needs to go back between us and the county on some certification documents, and that's really all we need. We need to space those 2 resolutions apart, sometimes by meeting, and sometimes just by a matter of minutes if the county certifying agent has the opportunity to review those funds. So we can do that in fairly short order. The next item on the agenda is as it relates to the 5-year forecast. And I've been receiving this question quite a lot, both from staff members, stakeholders, and those around the state of Ohio is, what are you forecasting? What are you forecasting now under COVID-19 circumstances? What do you know? What kind of revenue do you have? So here's what we know now. We know that on the revenue side of the equation, as reported last week in the 5-year forecast, we've received approximately $10 million. We had a meeting with the Department of Education yesterday, very good meeting, and appreciate their resource. That gives us a lot of flexibility. We can use this for staff, we can use this for equipment, we can use this for technology, we can use this for overtime, we can use this for the hiring of staff or temporary assignments. We have a lot of flexibility. We have to follow their guidelines in terms of how to monitor that or time and attendance logs. But we have those mechanisms in place with the special thanks to business office and the HR office. We already do that kind of work. So to track that and set that up through our enterprise software we can do that. In fact, we've already started to. The grant application from the state of Ohio has been made available as of yesterday. And so we started on the application process as of yesterday afternoon, following up with the ODE meeting with the intent to submit for some of the expenses back to March 13th that fit the COVID-19 responses. We know on the expense side of the equation, unfortunately, we've received about $3.5 million reduction. While that represents only about 1% of our budget, as you know, we are expecting a larger budget reduction for the 2021 school year. The fiscal part of that starts July 1st. It would be, and we are appealing to the Department of Education and the governor's office at every opportunity through the superintendent, myself, and others, that the sooner we know that number, the better we are to plan for programming, especially for those districts that are seeking new operating money or in that cycle where they need be. As far as the amount of cuts that we expect, that's really up in the air. Unfortunately, have been cited in the media, both through you and board meetings and the forecast and publicly with the various departments out of Columbus, that this could be anywhere between 5 and 15%. Could it go higher? It is very possible, as we know some of our other government counterparts have seen those kind of cuts. I'm going to pause there, open it up for questions. And in the meantime, I'm going to bring up our levy history, our pass-fail, and answer any more questions as it relates to kind of millage, general millage numbers. We can go back to that handout and, not to precede the board at all, but what typically have we asked in terms of previous levy attempts? So I'll pause there, Mr. President, and then bring up some additional documentation.
Thank you. While Ryan's preparing for what will probably be the final sort of organized topic for tonight before we go back to the calendar and timeline and figure out what we want our discussions to look like over the coming weeks, does anybody have questions on current budget, 2021 budget, 5-year forecast, financials of any kind that are kind of influencing our decisions right now? Lisa, I see you have a COVID-related question. Go ahead.
Just a quick question, Ryan, about the CARES Act money. So I know there was a big front page article in the Beacon Journal about how if the county wasn't spending money, that the money might have to go back. And I know they found a way that's going to work with their audit. So it's our understanding that equipment that we purchased, does it have to be COVID equipment? So are we looking at thermometers and ways that we're going to cope with COVID, or is it general spending?
There are 12 or so components of the guidelines of COVID spending, and they are all very loosely organized around expenses related to COVID. We actually took a spreadsheet that Todd Atkins created for us. He went through every purchase order the district's processed since March 13th to now, looking at COVID-related expenditures. And it's a fairly lengthy list, as you can imagine, and it varies from anything from a potential school bus to PPE equipment or technology. And again, we appreciate the support of ODE that we had the ability with the proper tracking mechanisms to go and rebate the district back to March 13th, of which we will submit next week. Into your first part of your question, how long and will we lose it? We have the opportunity to secure those funds through September 30th of 2022. We previously thought it was September 30th of 2021. That's now been extended for a year, or we just assumed that it was next year, and it has always been 2022. I have no doubt that we will have additional staff overtime, PPE, technology, support mechanisms in place for our families to consume that $10 million and then some. Thank you. All right, let me present again. Can everybody see the Akron City Schools levy history?
Yes.
Okay, great. It's a pretty.
Can you magnify it a little bit?
Sure can. There we go. Fills up the screen there. Yeah. So I'll just scan down through here. And I think there's a couple points of interest as you look at this. One is look at the dates, look at the spacing of the dates, look at the millage amounts, and also the history of pass versus failed. And then we'll do a little study at the end of this list as I pan down through. And again, you have this, I believe, emailed out to you, but if anybody needs a copy of this, just let me know. You can see in 1994, the district passed 8.9 mils. And back to that 1976 amount, that's been the largest millage that I've seen we've passed on operating. You see the different kinds of permanent improvement operating. I'll just do a quick review there when we get down to the end. Again, what the district is experiencing with its 5-year forecast in this cycle is operating funds. That 5-year forecast is what we call general fund. It's where we pay the majority of our staff, the majority of maintenance, basic supplies and materials for our classrooms, transportation. That's where we pay the majority of our general expenses is out of operating funds. As you know, the district has been blessed by a joint partnership with the city of Akron on a large capital project, 17 to 20 years in the making, wrapping up that 6th and final segment now with the Kenmore Garfield building. And that was a 0.25% income tax combined with some of our permanent improvement dollars to pay debt service on that. Then you also see the last time that we've passed permanent improvement millage was 1999. This district's been very fortunate to pass all continuous types of operating levy. Basically, what, in a sense, the board and community have decided upon is these are dollars that are permanently needed as long as that House Bill 920 effect is in place, which it will. It would take a constitutional amendment to change that. And so we haven't had the need to pass any types of shorter term levies like emergency levy, fixed sum, or fixed rate. So either you pick a dollar amount or you take that dollar amount and back into the millage amount. It's all been continuous operating levies. And if you look, the previous two attempts we had were 7.9 passed. And in November 8th, in 2011, we had 5.5 mills operating failed. That's the case study I want to leave you with as we think about our future meetings. So one of the questions may be, why don't you come to us in a greater distance with larger millage? Or why don't you come to us more frequently with smaller millage? And again, I stress the time in which we want to engage the public, as I've heard from this board, from previous boards, committees, in the public, is we understand that schools operate on that fiscal cycle where they spend through cash reserves, but it's really starting to engage the community when you start to deficit spend, not when you're out of money, putting programs at risk. And so what happened in 2011 is where we talked a little bit is the district's perception and desire to go for a little bit smaller levy, smoothing out those peaks and valleys of that fiscal cycle. But what happens is when there is a need for operating levy and an amount is failed, you lose a full collection cycle, meaning those. So if the decision is made to put a levy on the ballot in November and we fail, we lose an entire year of collection. So whether we pass next May of 2021 or we pass in November of 2021, no new revenues come into the district until January of 22. So there's almost an immediate need to raise millage amounts. So we'll, I think Dr. Akbar and Dr. Hall, Dr. Akbar brought that point up at the previous meeting, and Dr. Hall's kind of recommendation to unpack that maybe in the millage amounts in Finance Committee. But I did want you to see kind of the case study that's there and present when a community member may be saying, well, why ask this millage now? You know, so there's a prudence to our cycle and how we do those things.
Thank you. And we're going to pause there then, and we'll open it up for questions. Again, I'm watching hands and I'm paying attention to the chat. If you have a question on millage amounts, our past levy efforts, levy cycles, anything related to levies. Yes, Mr. Alexander.
Yeah, and thanks, Ryan, for giving us that presentation, that part of the presentation. I was looking at that, and you talked about looking at kind of looking at patterns and so forth. And looking at those numbers, when we ask for a smaller amount, we seem to fail. But when we ask for a little bit more, we seem to pass. So I was thinking maybe to put a levy on this fall, maybe it needs to be a higher amount, because that seems like that's the history of what happens. And it may be because the community feels we wouldn't have to come back as soon, plus you would be able to keep programs for our students. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you. Anyone else with a question or comment on levies? Okay. Well, tonight so far, we've talked about, sort of done a quick and deep dive into Levy 101 and levy history, as Ryan just wrapped up. We've talked about our timeline and our approvals that are needed if we are going to consider a levy for the ballot this November. We've talked a little bit about our current budget, the 2021 budget, and the 5-year forecast. I want to open it up too in a minute to see if David and Ellen have something to add. Before we do that, I'll explain after we open it up for David and Ellen to add anything to the discussion in terms of what we've talked about tonight. After we do that, we're going to go back to the original calendar that I put up. We're going to talk about how many more of these discussions would you like to have between now and July 27th in order to feel comfortable voting whether or not we're going to consider a levy for the fall. And so all of this is kind of designed for one meeting to sort of build onto the next. And so as I mentioned before as well, our next meeting is intended really to cover what a levy campaign would look like. So APS Levy Campaign 101, the structure of it, past experiences, best practices. I'll probably be touching base a lot with Ellen before our next meeting. We would talk a little bit about levy campaign finance. What does a levy campaign cost? How do we fund it? What do we need to do? What kind of stakeholders need to be included or on board with any decision to put a levy on the ballot? Is our levy, as Ryan mentioned earlier, a continuous operating levy? Are there any focus areas that we would like to include with our levy request? So next meeting, hopefully then we'll focus primarily on we'll skip ahead to the levy campaign and talk about what that would look like. In meetings 3 and 4, what we envision would be forecasting and modeling. So what, to Bruce's question earlier, or his comment rather, what do different millages look like on our 5-year forecast? What does 5.9, 7.9, 8.9, 10.9, what do all of those look like if we were to model them out? What do we know in terms of public feedback or public opinion? And then our fifth meeting ideally would be a wrap-up discussion and heading towards a final decision in preparation for the July 27th meeting. So I'm going to open it up now to David and Ellen. And while I do that, if you guys start thinking about what you'd like to see out of future meetings, what you'd like the schedule to look like, and what questions and topics you would like covered, I'd appreciate that. But David and Ellen, please, you guys have years of experience in this. Help us add to the discussion.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. President. So the big thing that concerns me right now has been our COVID-19 response and what our future looks like. And I think even though we have gotten CARES Act funding, I really don't believe that the CARES Act funding is going to cover the cuts that we'll see to our revenue. The combined cut that we've already have seen through the end of this fiscal year, and then the potential cuts that we'll see moving forward into next fiscal year and possibly beyond. I read an article today about a lot of states have had to cut funding to their educational systems, and that's having a ripple effect across the country. So we're not unique, in that aspect. The other thing that I have to be concerned about is even with CARES Act funding, and depending on how we're going to be able to open up in the fall, what items we're going to need to do that. And Mr. President, you already mentioned things like the thermometers, or they're not the regular thermometers. These are like the kind of the infrared things that, you touch the forehead, and we may have to monitor temperatures in the fall. Those are a lot of things we don't know. But we'll have to comply with whatever the health guidelines are there. And then we'll also have to plan for, the potential, if there is another wave of outbreaks, how we're going to deal with that. So those are some of the things that are top of mind. But the other one is even, just with funding cuts in general, it's a concern about, programs that we've recently implemented, like our College and Career Academy program, where we have a lot of partners in the community with our businesses. And that's really about our young people having a future. We have our virtual graduations taking place this week and next. And there's a real concern about, the employability of our graduates, and that's going to continue. And there will be a need to have trained people. So I just want to make sure that, we're all thinking about, it's about COVID, but it's a lot bigger, that there are some very important issues that we're going to have to consider just in terms of how do we maintain programs that are really benefiting our students and families in the district moving forward. And I think that is really the basis of a case on whether or not a levy should go on the ballot in November.
Thank you so much, Ellen. And then I see people are lining up with questions, so please put it in the chat or give me a high sign. But Ellen, what do you have to add?
I think from my perspective, just to kind of second what the superintendent said, Mr. President, is that we already, prior to COVID, were at a place where the Finance Committee, as well as the administration, felt as though we were heading into a situation where we were going to have to go on the ballot sometime soon. As you know, those early discussions were happening. And then we get the unknown of COVID, where everything appears to be that we're going to need additional funding. We're going to receive cuts from the state, and we're going to have additional needs to be able to accommodate all of the safety items that we need. Plus, we may need, depending on the school models that we choose, we may need additional staff to accommodate smaller class sizes and things like that. So when the need was already there, and then the need only appears to grow during the current conditions, I think it seems pretty clear that the need is there. And I know the Finance Committee will dig even deeper into that and come back and share with the full board. As you know, going into a campaign is not just about the people on this call, that this is a community effort. And so I think what you've laid out in terms of getting that input from our key community stakeholders is critical, because it has to be that everybody is together on this within the context of COVID-19 right now. That's the way we go. And so I think the path that you've laid out is a strong one, and will give us the information that we need.
Good, thank you so much. We already have some questions lined up, so we're going to go ahead and start with Ms. McKittrick.
Thank you. How do we balance the needs of the school district while at the same time understand that the people we're going to be asking for money are also hurting? I want to be empathetic to both sides, and I'm not sure how we do that. Thank you.
That's a good question. Mr. Superintendent, or Ryan, or Ellen?
I mean, in the past, I looked back at the 2000 on the chart, not the 2011, but the one that was before that, because I became superintendent in 2008. And of course, we had this whole financial issue going on. And I remember, we had a conversation with the community. We actually delayed a levy, at that time. We've always been honest, I think, with our public, with our stakeholders, with our business communities, and have always laid out a case for that. And I think when we're transparent and we're showing, the things that we've done, the things that we need, we will generally get the support, that's in this. It may take, more than one time, to get that levy to pass, but we've had a history here of just telling it like it is and just explaining, the need, and that, over this difficult time since March, I think we have been there, in the community trying to help out, a lot of things people may not even realize that, we've been participating with United Way and making sure that, funds were going directly to people that needed them. Our plan where we expanded and really did a yeoman's job of, providing meals and working with the city to help do the same thing over the summer. So I think people appreciate that. And, we do understand because we deal with the families. And, the issue with that is for our families who have school age kids, there are a lot of extra services that we're providing, to those families to help them be whole.
Good question, Patrick. Thank you. Other questions for David or Ellen or Ryan on any of these topics? Anyone else? Well, good. So I want to talk just a little bit about the layout of Dr. Akbar. Yeah, go ahead. You had a question. I may not have seen that in time. Go ahead.
Oh, I was waiting to see if someone else had a question before I asked. So this question goes to Ellen and David. I just would like to know, as we begin this process of discussing a levy, and are there any resources that you need as we move forward? For your staff to also kind of have some similar discussions or whatever discussions and conversations you all need to have?
No, and not in terms of resources for, our internal staff. We do focus groups as well, and to get their input and what they see as well, because I think that helps inform the board's decision in the end.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's anything additional. We usually do focus groups. We look at our own, finances within the context of what you're looking at to see any kind of adjustments that we would have to make if we wait versus going now, so that, as you know, we're unbelievably transparent, both with our staff and with the community. So we will do that due diligence just to look at what would happen if we went now, what would happen if we waited, just to make sure that everyone has the information, you and the public.
Thank you.
Mr. President, you're muted.
Yeah, I thought I was the only one that couldn't hear him.
No, technology is great until you're not paying attention to it. Thank you for that. Any other questions before we move on to the next topic, which would be our calendar and kind of planning out our next several discussions? Okay. Well, then I want to go back to the calendar for just a moment, and I kind of laid out what we had kind of thought about in terms of what the next several topics would be. And again, just to review those, and they're in the document that I shared with you already. But meeting number 2, our next meeting would be about the APS Levy Campaign, sort of a 101. Levy campaign finance, stakeholders, any targeted areas that we would like our campaign, if we did one, to focus on. Meeting number 3 and 4 would primarily be about millage, forecasting, modeling, narrowing down our options to something that we feel, if we did move forward with a levy, would be palatable. Meeting number 5 would be a wrap-up meeting. And then in between, we have the option of holding some virtual meetings. And I'm going to share that calendar again now. And I will share it with you via email, especially once we get your thoughts on how you'd like to see the meetings structured. Again, how many of them you'd like to have, what topics you would like to see covered. And keeping in mind that all of this is to kind of get to that, excuse me, to get to that July 27th meeting where we can vote on resolutions that Ryan mentioned earlier that we need in order to actually put a levy on the ballot. So again, we're in week 1 right now. We're holding that special meeting as we speak. Week number 3, and again, these are, we could offset these if you would prefer to have a meeting every week. On weeks where we don't have board meetings, we could keep them like they are. They could be on Wednesdays. They could not be on Wednesdays. They could be any day of the week. So I just kind of laid them out there. Again, we kind of plugged in the virtual town halls in between the special meetings. We allowed for up to 3 of those if we wanted to come up with something creative. And as Dr. Akbar mentioned earlier, one of them we mentioned we would maybe partner with some of the folks from Akron City Council who have built-in audiences at their ward meetings. Maybe another one we would partner with NAACP and the Urban League and Fame Fathers and groups like that to who have also built-in audiences where we could work with them. Another one we might work with community groups and neighborhood associations and block watches and those types of groups to see if we could get just a few to sponsor. They would obviously be open to anyone, anywhere across the city. But by partnering with folks, we might be able to build a little bit of an audience, and at least we will then have attempted to inform and engage the community as we go. If you like this, we can leave it as is and work on scheduling out those meetings. If you have suggestions or questions or things you would like us to address, then let me know now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here in a moment so that I can see all of you. And I know that there's already someone in the chat, so I'll check that as soon as I stop sharing my screen. But it's also sort of the list version of this schedule is in the document that I shared with you. So if you want to pull that up, you can kind of take at it, a look at it in list view. So right now I want to kind of talk about the schedule, your thoughts, and any questions or topics you would like us to include at any of those future meetings. So with that, I will open it up and let me check the chat first so I don't miss anyone in order here. Dr. Akbar has, and Valerie has a comment. Thank you, Valerie, for that. Dr. Hall, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. President. So first off, applaud the outside the box sort of approach to community engagement. My question is really, how does this dovetail with what we have done historically? So I'm thinking like 8 years ago when we last passed the levy. Is this plan sort of consistent with that, or is this sort of markedly different? Just we'd like to hear your comments on that.
No, it's consistent with what we've done in the past. There's always been, a lot of community involvement. It's actually, our campaign is run by the Citizens Committee, because as you'll learn in the finance portion of the levy in the next meeting, none of our general fund money can be used to finance a campaign. We have to get donations. So there's, a lot of partners that we'll reach out to, and there's always been a lot of community involvement and interest in our campaigns from the past.
Yeah, and as Lisa pointed out, and I'll let Lisa and Bruce jump in too on sort of the precursors to the levy, I will say that this is a little markedly different, Dr. Hall, in that our discussions typically have started a little bit earlier and they've been maybe a little less structured, but because we only have 10 weeks left and we're trying to fit in a few months ago, all condensed down into 10 weeks of discussion. At least on the board side, I think the strategy leading up to the decision on July 27th is markedly different because, as Lisa pointed out, we can't be in person right now. And so it's making things a little bit more difficult. And we've been significantly delayed in our discussions because we needed to give staff room to breathe and focus their effort and resources on the kids and the families during the COVID crisis. So Lisa, Bruce, do you want to add anything to that? You guys have been through the last couple as well.
I would just add, it's even strange in this context for us, right? We can't read each other's body language. There's only so much you can get off a two-dimensional screen. You know, I see Dr. Hall come up for a few seconds. I see NJ come up for a few seconds.
Lisa?
Yes.
Can we pause just to check? Did we lose somebody? Valerie, Bruce, Diana, Derek, Lisa? We lost NJ. Can we hang on 1 second?
Holding on.
I'll shoot him a quick text too.
Hey, Ms. Mansfield, while we're holding on, when you jump back in with your response, I think you were going this direction, but I had a similar concern about how we get people onto these virtual online platforms, because getting 2, 3, 4 people, gosh, I mean, just like you love to see, there's a strategy or a technique that we can employ from a social media standpoint to kind of get more people to join these chats as we start to roll these out.
Absolutely. I feel where you're going. Like I said, it'll be hard to gauge people's feelings and emotions, because it's hard to tell each other, right? So can we have 300 people? Maybe, but maybe only a few of them can participate. It's tough. It's tough.
NJ's trying to reconnect, so we'll hold on just a second so that we don't have too much discussion without him or fall afoul of the AG guidelines. No, you're fine.
Patrick, do you have a puppy dog?
I do. Why? Do you hear him?
I could hear little feet scurrying or something, and I couldn't figure out what I was hearing. I'm like, what is that? Who's not muted? Who has a dog?
I'm quietly tapping in homage to Derek over there. You can't see my feet, but I'm tapping a little.
Lisa, I thought you were referencing my daughter running around. That maybe we're running around too. So, but we can blame it on the dog and the tapping feet. Yeah, we'll go with that.
That's a different pitter patter. There's a different kind of pitter patter to puppies than to little girls.
We've got a small puppy and wooden floors, so you hear him everywhere.
Yeah.
All right. Well, NJ did say he was trying to reconnect, so he had to reboot, so he is coming back on, or should be coming back on any second. Thank you for your patience.
Gotta check his internet provider. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
I'm glad you said it now, because I was biting at the chip. Biting my tongue not to say that.
Get 6th grade. I did get 2 superlatives at David Hill Elementary School for 6th grade. I got most talkative and class clown. So, so occasionally that mischievous instinct gets the better of me, and I have to make a comment. So, apologies to whoever. Yes, apologies to whoever his internet provider is.
See, is that the feet or is that tapping?
That was the feet.
Okay.
That was the puppy.
I thought so.
All right. I think Derek's going to call in instead of joining, because he said it's still trying to connect him, but it's not connecting. So we are going to get him the call-in number really quick. I'm texting that to him now.
Do you have the call-in number, Patrick?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Have you all done your graduation speeches, just out of curiosity?
Friday.
Yeah, okay. I did mine today.
Okay, I got to get in there on Friday as well.
Oh, now we lost Ryan. What's up?
Ryan had another commitment at 7 o'clock, so.
Oh, okay.
Can't remember. I thought there was someone else who had a commitment too, but I could be wrong. All right, NJ's calling in, so he said it's letting him join now, so he should be with us any second. And to the public, the guidance from the Attorney General provides that if we hold a meeting virtually, that if anybody drops off the meeting, we pause the meeting until they can rejoin. So we've done so. Welcome back, Dr. Akbar. Sorry about that. Lisa, go ahead. You were talking about what you see in terms of differences between now and the last couple levy campaigns.
Sure. And I was just saying that while the timeline and of course, the reaching out seems very similar, it's the way we have to do it, right? I mean, there's so much that we lose just even between each other, not being able to be in the same room. I think the challenge in presenting with those community partners is, and trying to get those virtual town halls going, is how do we do that in a way that gets public feedback, gets not only just gets our message out, but gets people to attend and things like that. So those are the only that's a huge difference, right? Because so much of getting this message out is being able to talk to people.
Yeah. And Patrick, I want to jump in too, if you don't mind. I think also with this COVID, and we're doing so much virtual, so many things virtually, we're going to have to probably, as board members, as those who are working for the board and working on a campaign, to use our social media and social media formats to reach out to people as well, whether it be to get them to be involved at these virtual meetings, or that we'll get them to give feedback and be involved with us on this levy, because we can't, as Lisa said, we can't get out there and be with them. We would to see people and talk to them, but we could, engage them through social media ourselves.
Yeah, and I'll add too, it is definitely different, but I think what you'll find too is Bruce said it as well, or referred to it as well. The board has a pivotal role to play. Each of us was elected to this board. We all have folks, supporters, and folks in our corner, and people that we talk to, and places and meetings that we frequent. And so we're going to rely really heavily on that. And I will say that in terms of the campaign, David and Ellen have always done an outstanding job of engaging the board. There is a role to play for everyone. Your calendar, typically, if we do a levy campaign, will fill up very quickly. It'll be interesting, as has been pointed out, to see what that looks like this year, since there may not be a lot of opportunities to address larger groups in person, but hopefully we can still find creative ways to do that if the decision of the board is to move forward with a levy. So what other questions? Anyone else with a question or a comment on the schedule, what you'd like to see out of a future meeting? Is what we laid out okay? Do you want us to work on getting things scheduled and move forward, or would you like to see some adjustments? Fewer meetings, more meetings?
I think this is fine, Mr. Brook.
Yeah, I kind of like the format and the what we have also.
Same here.
Okay, well, good. NJ and I will continue to share things out then as we go. Sure. And we'll always, of course, be collaborating with the administration. As I said earlier, they're the dedicated, experienced, knowledgeable boots on the ground. We can't do any of this without kind of their guidance and their support. And I really want the general public to know too that clearly, as has been made, I think, evident throughout this meeting anyway, is that we don't take a decision like this very lightly. This is an important decision. It impacts not just our kids and our families and our school buildings, but it impacts the entire community. And so we are taking this decision very seriously. We're hoping to lay out a plan that gives us an opportunity to have complete, full, informed discussions as a board, but also to touch base with the community and hear from them along the way. And to someone's point earlier about those meetings, I've always felt, even when we took our board meetings on the road, and Diana, I know you probably remember those when we had been at Bookdale previously. When we took those meetings on the road, sometimes they were well attended and sometimes they weren't. But the point was that we did it, and we went out there and we made ourselves available. And I think that's what Dr. Akbar and I were kind of thinking when we put this rough plan together, is we want to make sure that that we're out there. We provide the opportunity. We do our best to get people engaged, and hopefully that works out. Want to make sure we didn't lose anybody. I see 1, 2.
I think Lisa just fell off.
And she's back. Okay. So
I have a question.
yes, Miss Autry, go ahead.
Just kind of piggybacking, on what you said. I like a part to take shit. And I just also, in addition, just want to, coming off of my meeting with Mark Williamson, that we're utilizing all call and our messaging capabilities so that our families are getting the invitations, no matter who the sponsor is. So I just wanted to make that point as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it. That's a good point. Anybody else? If not, NJ and I will move forward, at least trying to formalize this calendar and then get it out to everyone. We'll work with staff to try and pull the board on best dates for meetings during each of those weeks, and best time for meetings during each of those weeks, recognizing everyone has a job and we work some different hours sometimes, or long hours sometimes. So we'll work on doing that. And then we'll be touching base with you too for your ideas on who should be included. And again, those sort of sponsors that we talked about, I don't even know, and I probably use that word and maybe sponsor is the wrong word. It's really a partner, maybe. Individually, we may not be able to get 100 people to join a meeting. Maybe if we partner with a few groups who can also encourage their folks to come out and participate, then maybe we can get a few more. But certainly we'll open that up to you, and we'll have some, we'll figure out a way for everyone to collaborate, even if that's a shared spreadsheet where you can put your ideas of who fits into that category, and hey, maybe you should reach out to these folks and ask them if they'd be willing to jump on as well and send it out to their folks. So we'll figure that out. We've got a lot to do in the next 10 weeks, and we'll try and be flexible. Any final comments, discussion, questions, concerns?
Yeah, I have a final comment. And that is, as we sort of think forward and sort of solicit community feedback, I know that going to sort of the Ward 7 meetings, that there's still questions in pockets of the city, certain buildings, right? So whether it's how we whether or not we're keeping some certain buildings open, yada yada yada. So I just want us to anticipate that we're going to get questions about that come up during this levy campaign as well. So just and again, that's just a comment.
Dr. Hall, that's a good comment, and I think, and I'm going to type that in as we're speaking, but I think including in our conversation what proactive measures we've taken to be good stewards of public dollars since the last levy campaign, what our current footprint looks like, which is actually part of at least one of the answers to that question, and what our plan is for buildings moving forward. And certainly all of that's in jeopardy, if we need a levy and one doesn't pass. So what other questions still need to be answered in future meetings or topics that you would like to see addressed? That's a good one. And if you can't think of one now, that's okay. You know, you can email and we'll add it to one of the agendas for one of the future meetings. But if you have one that's burning, let us know.
Well, the last one I would toss in there since you asked is also programmatic questions as well, right? So how does this levy impact certain programs, whether it's college and career academies, whether it's performing arts, over at Miller South, so how if and again, it may not impact, right? But again, as we sort of think about that community roadshow, sporting programs, again, the arts. So how does this levy, passing or not passing, sort of impact the maintenance of those programs that are important to a lot of folks in the community?
Yeah, and I think we can ask Ryan, David, and Ellen to help us put together in those years where levies have failed, what programs were impacted and why. And I think that's pretty easy. And then and glean from there what programs would be in jeopardy if we needed a levy and the next one didn't pass. Another good question. Anything else? Dr. Akbar, do you have anything as we start to wrap up?
The only thing that I would add to what Dr. Hall mentioned was not necessarily looking back at it's fine if we do find out what was impacted by the failed levies in the past, but think about this. Since 2012, our district looks a lot different than it did when it failed in 2011 and previously. So thinking about the district now and the current realities, what are those major pieces that the levy will help us right size? So when we talk about the realities of COVID and the impact of the state cuts on our district, what impact does that have, and how the levy would help us resolve or mitigate some of those issues moving forward, along with the other issues that we had before COVID even came into our lives unexpectedly.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I guess the last part of what I was saying, and apologies for not being more articulate in this regard, but I think it's also important to talk about not just about maintaining the status quo or current scenario, but thinking about, if we pass the levy, what kind of new ideas and new programs would we like to see or propose that the new levy could also be a part of helping to fund, right? So that idea of introducing hope into that community conversation as well. So and again, I'll leave it there, but that's my contribution for tonight.
Good. And if you,
I would agree. I would think that we need to have a two-pronged approach. What things we have that we want to keep, and what things we would like to introduce. I think there has been some discussion about pre-K maybe would be the one thing that we'd want to focus on as to something we'd like to bring in. Then we'd also want to talk about the things we want to keep, any of those programmatic things, college and career academies, any of those things that we do have in place that we want to keep.
I think that's a good point. And if you are looking at the shared document, it's just a working document. Nothing in there is final. We're changing it on a daily basis. But in meeting number 2, where we talk about targeted campaign focus, there's a note after that to Ms. McKittrick's point, where we had put in early childhood. Is something like that a part of our levy discussion? And it's not limited certainly to early childhood. It could be a technology initiative. It could be, whatever that is. So we did reserve some space in meeting number 2 for us to at least start talking a little bit about that. So good point. What else do we have? Well, I do want to say thank you for taking your time out of a Wednesday night to spend some time talking about this. It's an important discussion and one we've put off for a little bit, understandably so, but I'm glad we're having it now. And if there's anybody out there watching from the public, thank you for being with us. Thank you for watching. We want to be as transparent as possible through this entire process. We want to hear from you, so please reach out to us. Our emails and phone numbers can be found on the Akron Public Schools website. And of course, meeting notices will go out for every one of these meetings that we have to have this discussion. The YouTube links for the live streams can always be found on our website. So please visit our APS or akronschools.com to find out more about that. Also, just a quick plug for tonight, although it's not on the agenda. So if Ms. Vital could plug her ears, please. Just want to mention that the May Festival is streaming tonight live at 8 p.m. Tonight, tomorrow, and Friday. And so this 93-year tradition that is the May Festival, unfortunately, cannot be in person, is streaming live. So if you'd like the link for that, again, please visit akronschools.com and grab the link there, or join us on our Facebook page and grab the link from there as well. All of you, the board members who are out there doing your graduation videos and thank you videos, and I can't wait to see the student representative to the board. I can't wait to see all of those. That was a little fun and innovative. So shout out to Dreama Whitfield for that as well. She did a great job. Thank you for all that you do and for keeping everything moving. We appreciate it. Any final thoughts from the superintendent, assistant superintendent, Dr. Akbar? All right.
Nothing really. Just thank you for this discussion. And Patrick and I have met multiple times and probably will multiple times each week until we make the decision, and or even actually might even be beyond that point. So feel free to reach out to either one of us as we move forward in this discussion, because it's going to go fast and furious, and I don't want anyone to feel like they got left behind or they didn't get what they needed when they needed it, which is another reason why we put up the schedule the way we did, so that we can try to get everybody what they needed when they needed it. And I see Lisa had something.
I was just going to thank you guys publicly. I did in the chat, but I really do appreciate the extra effort that must be going into this from you and Patrick. And that goes both ways. Please reach out to us as well if there's anything we can do. You know, silence often means we think you all are doing such a great job, but it doesn't mean that we don't want to help. So this is definitely, from what I've seen, it is definitely a, you know, many hands make light the work board. So don't hesitate to reach out.
And I'm sure we will. All right, with that and hearing nothing else from the board, we will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. We have a
Second.
motion from Ms. McKittrick and a second from Ms. Autry. If someone could pass that along to Mr. Pendleton. Thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed that would like to still continue meeting this evening? Hearing none, enjoy your night, and we'll see you at our next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Take care, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Good.
You.